Hello. Welcome to another video. I mentioned this in my T110 E5 grind video that I'll probably upload before this. The Calliope released since I made the previous week's iteration, which was part 3, I believe. And it's interesting. The main tank itself is an E4 Sherman that's been up-tiered. So it has okay penetration for tier 6, and you better hope and pray you don't end up in tier 8 games, which, due to the way that Matchmaker works for tier 6s, is probably going to happen a lot. So be prepared to not be able to pin anything, and hope and pray that they decide that you're not the priority target, being a tier 6 in a tier 8 game. But the main appeal of this is not its gun or its lack of armor or the fact that it's a tier 5 tank that's been up tiered. The main draw is the funny rocket pod on top. This rocket rack with 65mm of pen for 250 damage. It's an auto-loading sort of system from what I've seen. It's okay. Like, you can get some things, you can surprise some stuff, you can pin it can pin itself from the side and sometimes from the front, if you get a good angle on it. They're nothing to write home about, to be honest. They're glorified HE shells, basically. So, it gave me the idea. What if you're like me, and on my PlayStation account here, I didn't finish enough of the season events to actually get this tank. So, you might be wondering, what do I do? So is there an alternative for me if I didn't get the Calliope and I don't want to spend 4,300 gold? They're selling it for 4,300 gold. It's not worth 4,300 gold. I'm gonna tell you right now. The Calliope's not worth that much gold. So if you see it pop up, it's not worth that much gold. Don't bother. Don't. There are better options at tier 6. And if you don't want to spend any gold, think of this thing. I know you might be thinking, but this is a tier 4 and it's also an Italian tank. Yes. It's the P2640. It has 70mm of penetration with its HE, and it's at tier 4, not tier 6. Why is this important? I'm gonna show you, hopefully in this game. I'm gonna play this live, and hopefully show you what 5 extra penetration at 2 tiers lower can do for you. Which, if I remember correctly, I think the tier 5 in this line can also get this funny HE round, because it's not the fully upgraded 75, but I think it's the second 75 you can get on the tier 5. And I don't know if it's on the tier 6 or not, but the tier 6 is a pretty solid tank anyways, so you're not missing out, really. So let's see. What kind of matchup do we get? We are top tier because, you know, it's a tier 4 tank. It gets preferential matchmaking by default. There's only like 2 that don't get preferential matchmaking. And, yeah, I'm gonna try and show you what this thing can do with 70mm of penetration on an HE shell. It doesn't quite have the damage of the rocket, because rockets do like, the rockets on the Calliope do like 250. This one does like 175 average. I just hit maneuvered a light tank. Didn't bother to turn. And I am playing with a fair bit of delay because my ISP is being rude, and I do not have a capture card. If I had a capture card, I wouldn't have to deal with this kind of input delay, but you know what? It is what it is. I make do. So let's see, we got... There's no way we're hitting that. not with this input delay. However, we can't hit that Stewart. So we're already on the board for 183 damage. That Panzer 1C deadass just stopped in front of a, Okay. Sure. I don't think that was the best decision for living, but, you know, you do you. See, we're gonna play a little aggressive here. Hopefully nothing pops out from behind the... Okay, thank you, input delay. Oh, we've tracked him. So let's get some assisted damage with that. That's the other good thing about this thing being an HE primarily firing gun. We can do kind of silly things like getting tracking assist damage and pinning that mortar for 168 damage. The only thing is we can't shoot through walls and the like, but if we can get behind this mortar, 164 damage, and you just shot the ground. 157. That's basically the HE rounds on this. For most tanks you're gonna see at tier 4, you're gonna probably pin. The thing is, the HE shells give you a chance of doing significantly more damage than the AP. And at the end of the day, I believe the HE shells also cost significantly less than the AP shells. The only difference between the two is with the AP, you can shoot through things. With the HE, you can't shoot through things. So you have to have a clear line of sight in order to actually do damage. But you know what? 700 damage in a tier 4 tank is pretty solid, considering I'm firing only HE. And with 70 millimeters, you have a little bit more playroom. I said playroom. You have a little bit more room to play around with than the 65 2 tiers higher that the Calliope has. Now, if the Calliope itself had 70, like if they give it 5 more millimeters of penetration on the HE shells, I think it would be on the rocket's penetration. I think it'd be perfectly fine. Now you may be sitting there wondering, now hold on a minute, don't you hate ATGMs in the way that they work in Cold War? Basically yes, because they do too much damage. The rockets on the Calliope are dumbfire. You can't guide those. You just point, fire, and hope that somebody sits still long enough for them to hit, or you fire them point blank. The thing is, why I don't have an issue with those compared to ATGMs is, at the tier that it's at, it's immediately going to be compared to the KV-2. Now, why do I not have an issue with that when I have an issue with the ATGMs and the way that they function? ATGMs do like about 1,000 damage on average. KV-2 does like 800 if it pins with AG. That's if they're firing AG. The counterpoint, it is a long-ass reload. And you have to play very carefully a majority of times with something like that. Same thing with the Calliope, because the Calliope has no armor, and it's not on a light tank. There is the main pain point that I have with the ATGM difference. ATGMs are mounted on light tanks primarily. Things that move really, really fast and are not super big most of the time. So, you know, they can fire, hide behind something, and or just dart away, and more often than not be fine because of the way that the game works. And also, you know, the fact that the overmatch system isn't completely consistent, because in all reality, most of the tanks that have the ATGMs, if they got hit by any of the other tanks, even just so slightly, the round itself would probably rip it in half. But I digress. Anyways, yeah. So if you did not complete all the seasons to get the Calliope, and you sure don't want to pay 4,000 plus gold for an up-tiered E4 Sherman with basically complicated HE, there you go. The Italian mediums. You got a tier 4 that will do the trick basically just as well. You can get the same experience, but better matchmaking. So, yeah. Let me know what you think down below. And, if you want to see me make more of these little videos where I go in depth and try to find some alternatives and or talk about some potential things to, shake things up. I know I didn't go fully in depth why giving the Calliope 5 more penetration on the rockets would be okay, so let me do that before I wrap up. It would be okay because at the end of the day, it's at tier 6. The only things that it is going to pin with 70 millimeters of HE penetrations are if you get side shots on stuff or, you know, lightly armored things still. But the splash damage will be more impactful than its current splash damage, because I don't know about you, but even with the T1 heavy, if a Calliope unloaded its entire clip from the rocket rack into me while I was front facing, at most each rocket maybe did like 13 to 20 damage. Meanwhile, with the 3-inch gun, the stock gun on the T1, I was punching through it consistently. So, if a tier 5 with a stock gun can punch straight through it without any issues, if it's running up against other tier 6s, for instance, like the KV2 here, that could just sit in front of it and hit it for 700 to 900 of its pre-existing health. It only has 850 HP, if I remember correctly. So, taking a high roll from the KV2 is a death sentence for the Calliope. And God forbid it goes into a tier 8 game and runs into something like this that has 212 millimeters of penetration and just will not care, or this with 221, or, you know, even this that's a tier higher, which it will probably see these a fair bit. This 390. Yeah. Like, yeah, I would, it's a support tank. You're not supposed to basically be trying to frontline with it. You're gonna want to follow behind things and take opportunistic shots with it and use the rocket rack on anything with light armor, because there's a lot of things at your own tier that are just basically gonna rip you apart if you try to alpha trade. But anyways, hope you enjoy. Let me know what you think down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.